Hi everyone, Zoe here. Boy, do I have a fun topic for you today. But first, a quick word of thanks to the kind people who are supporting my channel via Patreon. You can too if you like. I know I got a little burnt out after producing that trio of closely packed democracy videos early in July, so I'm hoping to return to a more stable release schedule over the course of August. Anyway, we'll see. Also, lest anyone thinks I'm ignoring their feedback about the length of these videos, I swear I'm trying to make them shorter. Anyone who knows me knows this is a massive challenge. But I was so sure with this one that I would manage to get it to squeak in under 15 or maybe 20 minutes. But no, sadly it looks like it's going to be another half-hour special. But there's always next time, right? Now, I wish we lived in the kind of world where pointing out there are no ethical billionaires wasn't merely uncontroversial, but in fact prompted confused queries like, "What's a billionaire?" followed by looks of profound horror and disgust the moment a definition was supplied. Sadly, we occupy a far darker timeline where we're constantly bombarded with messages not only designed to ensure we accept the existence of billionaires, but which encourage us to buy into the lie that they're somehow necessary or even aspirational figures. Spoilers, they're not. Billionaires are the precise opposite of what any decent person should aspire to become. They embody some of the very worst aspects of human nature and routinely leverage their obscene, ill-gotten wealth to entrench sociocultural structures hostile to the great majority of people on this planet. Make no mistake, billionaires and the political classes that cater to them are your enemies. Their systematic, centuries-long theft of global resources has left the average person in a permanent state of economic precarity, which immiserates our lives, fragments our communities, and truncates our human potential. Billionaires shouldn't exist. We need to expropriate the majority of their unearned assets and pass laws to prevent this kind of unimaginable accumulation of wealth from recurring if humanity is to have any chance against the existential threats we currently face. Right, I think that sets the tone rather nicely, so why don't we now examine some popular myths regarding billionaires? You know, the kinds of talking points that most folks will unthinkingly parrot, care of a lifetime's indoctrination under the hellscape of late-stage capitalism. A common refrain made by billionaires and their cheerleaders is that they're somehow self-made men, because, shockingly I know, most of them are male. Let's unpack the unjustified hubris and immense sense of personal entitlement that statement conveys. The annual celebration of sociopathy and excess, known as the Forbes 400, claims roughly 70% of the 400 richest Americans made their fortunes with no outside help whatsoever. This is a preposterous and easily disprovable assertion, which deliberately ignores the many invisible support structures they benefited from. According to the 2012 analysis by UFE, over 60% of the Forbes 400 list grew up in circumstances of substantial privilege, and a full 40% of them inherited a sizable asset from a spouse or family member, clearly setting them on the path to their present billionaire status. Now, if you're wondering what constitutes a sizable asset, here's an example. Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed to have received only $1 million from his father, but in reality, dear old dad gave him over $400 million in assets, ensuring he'd eventually accumulate $1 billion, no matter how many businesses he ran into the ground. It was a lot. Yet Donald Trump still has the gall to call himself a self-made man. The IPS report Billionaire Bonanza 2018, Inherited Wealth Dynasties in the 21st Century U.S., exposes how intergenerational wealth has come to utterly dominate the American socioeconomic landscape. Care of 3 decades of massive economic growth, the net worth of dynastic billionaire families is now 60 times larger than it was in the 1980s. While median U.S. household wealth has in fact decreased by 3%. So no, there are no self-made billionaires. We, the poor working stiffs who actually drive the economy, we make billionaires by letting them siphon off the fruits of our labor and our increased productivity. Or More accurately, our corrupt governments make billionaires by failing to adequately tax them. The situation is particularly stark in the US, as decades of regressive legislation has finally brought the effective tax rate for billionaires below what's paid by the average working-class American. Remember when Warren Buffett quipped that his secretary probably paid a higher tax rate than him? Yeah, that's absolutely true, and completely obscene. This growing economic inequality is rooted in many factors, but one of the most insidious is the disparity between how the average citizen earns money and how the ultra-wealthy make theirs. Most people earn the bulk of their income as wages and spend the majority of it on living expenses. For them, how much money they'll have left over, if any, hinges primarily on income tax and household taxes like sales and property tax. Not so for billionaires, or even, the multi-millionaire politicians who legislate on their behalf. The rich generate most of their wealth from capital assets rather than employment, so corporate taxes on their shareholdings vastly outweigh whatever income tax bracket they happen to be in. Must just be a funny coincidence, then, that corporate taxes paid by the top 0.1% have fallen precipitously from their peak in the 1950s. Likewise, estate taxes are more or less the only thing preventing dynastic wealth from being passed from one generation of undeserving plutocrats to the next. So it comes as no surprise that those have been slashed for the top 0.1% as well. How nice for them. Meanwhile, sales and property taxes, which disproportionately impact lower earners, have remained largely constant over that same period. This has given rise in many industrialized nations to something called the inverse welfare state. Rather than promote the economic and social well-being of citizens by ensuring the ultra-wealthy contribute their fair share into the public coffers, we now have governments whose primary function is to protect rich individuals and corporations from having to share their wealth with the rest of society, whilst creating financial precarity for the working class to ensure it'll remain compliant with the needs of industry. Let's be clear on this. No one earns $1 billion, much less tens, hundreds, or as projected for smug employee-abusing cretins like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, thousands of billions of dollars. It's literally impossible. However, it is possible to exploit defenseless workers, pocket endless taxpayer-funded industry bailouts, and externalize their production costs in order to steal billions of dollars. And that's what billionaires actually represent. Theft. Theft of human potential, theft of labor protections, theft of our social safety net, theft of viable global ecosystems and thousands of species they once supported, theft of our futures. If this sounds hyperbolic to you, that's forgivable. Numbers like 1 billion are hard to visualize, so most folks don't realize how grossly unjust one person controlling $1 billion is. Let's see if I can help. In the middle of all this white nothingness, hopefully you can spot a tiny black square. If you're watching on a mobile device, apologies for the impromptu eye exam. Let's say that little square represents $2,500, which is pretty close to the median monthly income of an American worker. I mean, it's more than I earn every month, but luckily I'm pretty frugal and the UK government hasn't quite managed to dismantle the NHS yet, so I might survive a couple more decades, who knows. Now, I'm only paid when the courses I teach are running, which is 9 months of the year. So we can take 9 of these squares and squish them together for an optimistic estimate of my annual earnings. Let's further imagine I got this job when I came of age at 18, and that I worked solidly through my entire life until retiring at 67. By the way, no one's going to get to retire at 67 anymore. But anyway, that's 49 years, so we need to create a larger area, 7 of these blocks on a side. This is my lifetime earnings potential before subtracting taxes of around 20%. So just north of $1 million. Not bad, I suppose. By comparison, here's how much Jeff Bezos makes every hour by doing absolutely sod all. Oh, and for the curious, this is how much all 798,000 Amazon employees put together earn in the same hour, assuming they each receive Amazon's published median salary and follow a typical American work pattern. And unlike Bezos, most of them will be paying taxes in the range of 10 to 20%, whilst in 2019, Amazon as a company paid an effective tax rate of 1.2% on its $13.9 billion in profits. And that's after several years of paying no taxes at all. This is what I mean by theft. Oh, and if you're the sort of dickhead who'll try justifying why it's perfectly okay for one guy to passively pocket gains totaling nearly everything his company's 798,000 employees earn, often under truly horrific working conditions, then feel free to fuck right off and don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. Are they gone? Good, because things get heavy from here on out. Just to be clear, on the scale of this figure, my effective hourly wage rounds to 0 pixels. So let's expand the time frame to an 8-hour workday, which means my income now warrants a single pixel. 1. Can you see it? It's there, I promise. So yeah, my income is, as a professional educator, is an invisible dot. Jeff Bezos' income for doing nothing for 8 hours is this huge block. And here's the pre-tax income of the 798,000 employees whose labor is exploited so Jeff Bezos can make that for doing nothing. Have I mentioned I'm not a fan? In the words of Nick Hanauer, rich people don't create jobs. It's been painfully obvious since at least the 1980s that corporations only hire workers when they have absolutely no other choice, and they remain very enthusiastic about firing them the moment any easier way of making money presents itself. Case in point, whenever they're handed trillions of dollars of taxpayer money to bail them out during a crisis, they simply pocket the money, most of which goes into buying back their own stocks to boost the income of their principal shareholders, whilst jettisoning employees considered surplus to current levels of demand. You know who actually creates jobs? Consumers. Yeah, us, the public. Under a capitalist system, it's the public's demand for goods and services that fuels their production. Businesses merely arise to meet and exploit these desires and needs, so they can't take credit for creating jobs. Instead, what we actually observe are highly parasitic corporate structures that prey on government-imposed precarity, which most of the labor force finds itself trapped in. Companies only offer jobs out of purest necessity, driven by the dictates of the economy as a whole. And even then, only when doing so provides yet another way to convert public resources into private ones. You know, that whole theft thing I was talking about earlier. And speaking of government-sanctioned corporate theft, most people don't realize these companies receive far more in municipal or state incentives than the value of all the jobs they bring to a region. To quote Greg Leroy, author of The Great American Job Scam, freebies of this sort routinely doled out to companies include property tax abatements, corporate income tax credits, sales and utility excise tax exemptions, low-interest loans and loan guarantees, land write-downs, infrastructure subsidies, training grants, enterprise zones, TIF districts, and on and on and on. So, if you take away only one message from this section of the video, understand that corporations don't bring value to an area, they extract it. They don't create jobs, they exploit desperate workforces offering primarily low-quality, low-paying, low-job security employment that further impoverishes local communities. In the United States, they routinely fail to provide sufficient healthcare insurance, a practice widely documented at Amazon and Walmart, and instead freeload on social welfare programs like Medicaid. In most cases, the jobs they promise to generate are a complete fiction, partly because they aren't forced to keep their promises to municipalities, and partly because new jobs in one area can be used to cover layoffs the company has made in some other jurisdiction. It's a shell game, and since corporations and the billionaires who own them have zero loyalty to any community or country, when they're done devastating one area, they just up sticks and relocate that operation to whatever part of the world has yet to be sufficiently drained of its natural or labor resources. Closely related to the myth of job creation is another popular misconception, that billionaires are captains of industry. I mean, this is a tired 19th century conceit which argues that the selfish pursuit of power and wealth by robber barons nonetheless magically benefits the country as a whole. As I'm sure you can imagine, this narrative is very popular with the rich, as it lets them pretend their crass exploitation of labor, their willful destruction of communities, their pillaging of the environment, and their manipulation of politicians to serve their interests is somehow all justified because reasons. I mean, usually there's some vague implication that their actions must have strengthened the economy, but this is an extremely nebulous claim and one we should dismiss outright. It assumes a baseless counterfactual, namely that the economy would have been worse off if those employees hadn't been exploited, if those communities hadn't been destroyed, if our environment hadn't been pillaged, and if those politicians hadn't been bought. Not only is there no way to prove such an outcome, but all our natural instincts as human beings suggest the exact opposite. If anything, we'd expect that in a world where worker rights are respected, where the social fabric is strengthened, where the environment is protected, and where our elected representatives actually carry out the will of the people, the economy would have done at least as well, if not much, much better than it has done under the brutal steerage of our so-called captains of industry. Sometimes you'll find this framed even more euphemistically, as in neoliberal fantasies like trickle-down economics, that claim that giving tax breaks to the rich invigorates the economy, since some tiny sliver of that unearned wealth might eventually make it back into general circulation. This nonsense has been thoroughly debunked in the decades since Reagan and Thatcher popularized it. All of the evidence shows that billionaires and their hangers-on don't tend to spend their ever-increasing wealth, but instead hoard it. By contrast, when money is given to the average citizen, it's often applied almost at once to important and pressing expenses like housing, food, utilities, transportation, and healthcare, which, actually invigorates the economy. Another audacious excuse supplied by apologists for billionaires is that a handful of them engage in philanthropy. Allow me to disabuse you of this nonsense. The most lauded example is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, so let's start there. Established in 1994, it has since donated more than $36 billion to various charities and initiatives worldwide. Now, at first, that seems impressive, until you actually do the maths. You see, that works out to less than $1.5 billion per year being distributed to worthy causes, while Bill and Melinda themselves would personally need to give away $1 billion per year just to keep their own personal fortunes from growing. So, the largest philanthropic trust in the world is only barely outpacing Bill and Melinda's own personal accumulation of riches. This all comes down to something called passive income, which is how billionaires make their money. They sit back and let the companies, in which they have vast shareholdings, continue to brutally extract global resources and mistreat their workforces worldwide. People like Bill and Melinda are perfectly happy to profit from all of this misery, while simultaneously painting themselves as our saviors, for charitable donations which basically amount to rounding errors on their gargantuan unearned incomes. That right there is weapons-grade hypocrisy. Not only do private foundations provide cover for the unethical sources of billionaires' wealth, but they also help them to evade capital, estate, and income taxes. The kind needed to fund public services for the great majority of the populace, those taxes. Also, some types of philanthropic structures, most notoriously donor-advised funds, or DAFs, let billionaires continue to exercise full control over the money they have ostensibly given away, pocketing a huge tax break now for a donation they won't actually make for years to come. Another dubious form of philanthropy are contributions to so-called civic groups or 501c4s. Because all such donations are kept anonymous, They provide a perfect vehicle for injecting dark money into political campaigns or large-scale social movements. This provides billionaires with yet another way they can subvert democracy and impose their will on the public, even when opposed by hundreds of thousands or even millions of voters. Whether they're well-intentioned or brazenly self-serving, no individual should be able to exert that much power. Oh, and while we're at it, let's dismiss another transparent PR ploy devised by Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, the so-called giving pledge. Billionaires promising to donate most of their assets, either in drip-feed fashion over the remainder of their lives or upon death, is a meaningless gesture when their hoarded resources could be used to improve the lives of millions, possibly even billions, right fucking now. If they wanted to, they could end hunger today. They could eradicate homelessness today. They could establish universal health care and high-quality public education today. They could eliminate all student loan debt today. But they choose not to, because making the world a better place isn't that important to them. Their real priority is maintaining control over that huge pile of money they never earned and certainly don't deserve to keep. So, the next time you see some propaganda extolling the generosity of billionaires, just remind yourself that we wouldn't need their philanthropy if they hadn't stolen all of that wealth from us in the first place. One final myth I'd like to address is the delusion, especially popular in the States, that with hard work, talent, and a bit of luck, anyone could become a billionaire. This is depressing on so many levels. I mean, apart from being patently untrue, this belief is a cancer to the soul. It shifts the blame for systemic crimes against humanity from the perpetrators to their victims, and it deliberately short-circuits our natural human instincts towards community, towards fairness, towards a better world for everyone. The reason we don't have that better world is not because we lack imagination or technical ability, but because the resources we need to achieve it are being held hostage by sociopaths. How many resources, you ask? Well, Jeff Bezos currently controls $255.89 billion. So, if we stick with our earlier scale of 1 pixel representing $100, then we'd need to draw a square 50,586 pixels wide by 50,586 pixels tall. Clearly, that's too big to visualize, so let's keep going. A typical monitor resolution is 1920 pixels by 1080. So, multiplying those two numbers together, we get a total of just over 2 million pixels. So, if you switched off your monitor, don't do it while you're watching my video, please, that massive black rectangle staring back at you would represent a little more than $200 million. Now, that's an expensive monitor, but it's still peanuts compared to what Bezos owns. Remember, by doing nothing at all, he pulls down over $215 million each and every day. So, to represent his accumulated wealth, you'd need over 1,234 computer screens filled with nothing but darkness. Now, erecting a stack of monitors nearly half a kilometer high will probably violate civil aviation regulations, so you're better off assembling an Orwellian 1984-style telescreen, basically 35 monitors wide by 35 monitors tall. I mean, it still won't fit in your house, but it will look suitably ominous if you set it up in your local park, or occupying the middle of a football field, or perhaps covering the wall of an entire building in the town square. It's terrifying that the 3 richest Americans hold more wealth than the bottom half of the entire US population. We're talking 160 million people. People who are, even now, being forced out of their homes for falling behind on rent or mortgage payments because of the pandemic. People who are working 10 or more hours a day or multiple jobs in our gig economy just to support their families. Meanwhile, Bezos and his ilk are reaping banner profits in 2020, and their companies continue to pay next to nothing in taxes. The magnitude and brutality of these injustices should anger you. The smirking arrogance of billionaires and their cronies should anger you. The callous disregard for human lives should anger you. And the complicity of our politicians in enabling all this should most definitely anger you. I'm asking you to harness that anger to fight for positive change. Now, the US is the epicenter of this particular plague on humanity, with 614 of the world's 2,095 billionaires. So those in the States should definitely support the work of organizations like United for a Fair Economy, Americans for Tax Fairness, and the Institute for Policy Studies. But wherever you happen to live in the world, the tax legislation we should be pursuing is broadly the same. First, we need to stop taxing investment income at a lower rate than salaried income, as that only lets the mega rich basically pay a lower effective tax rate on their income than hardworking people. In fact, basic fairness and, human decency suggests that money received for doing absolutely nothing, like dividends and capital gains, should be taxed at a considerably higher rate than money earned from performing actual labor. Second, reform estate taxes for the mega wealthy. These have been so effectively gutted by loopholes over recent decades that the richest 0.1% of the population can often get away with paying almost nothing in inheritance taxes. This perpetuates that intergenerational cycle of dynastic wealth accumulation and locks us into a capitalist death spiral as all the world's resources are steadily funneled upwards into fewer and fewer hands, while the rest of the population is gradually plunged into poverty and serfdom. Third, institute a wealth tax on existing mountains of unearned riches, as this will gradually reclaim at least part of those funds for sorely needed public works and services. The net worth of the world's 2,095 billionaires is currently over $8 trillion. It's an unimaginable amount of money. And in recent years, this has been increasing at a clip of around 20% per annum, even as the average citizen struggles to achieve 1% interest on their bank savings. This is an absolutely criminal state of affairs, and there's no possible justification for allowing it to continue. We have the power, and indeed a moral obligation, to put an end to this before it ends all of us. Now, hopefully I've said enough to convince you, but to recap, 1, billionaires aren't self-made. 2, billionaires haven't earned their money. 3, billionaires don't create jobs. 4, billionaires aren't captains of industry. Marauding pirates, sure, but not captains of industry. And 5, billionaire philanthropy is self-serving and will never even come close to compensating humanity for the unbelievable amount of harm that was done in accumulating that wealth in the first place. These people are villains, and if they don't want us to treat them as such, there's a quick and easy solution. They can give away 99% of their wealth. Right now, not, when they die, if they don't change their minds before then, not dribbled out over the course of the coming decades. No, now, in 2020, while it can do some good. They'd still have enough money left over to ensure that they never have to work a single day in their entire lives, which is a far better deal than 99% of the human race gets. And I'll leave you with that. Well, wasn't that fun? If you agree, there's a few things you can do, like click the like button or leave me some feedback as a comment, or subscribe if you're not already subscribed to my channel. All of these things help. And if you'd like to move beyond that and support the channel and the videos I do in a more substantive fashion, I've listed a number of donation options here on this final slide. Right, I think that's about it, and I'll look forward to seeing you all in future videos. Take care.